Freddy Krueger, Shadows of Springwood. The night air hung heavy over the quiet suburb of Springwood, Ohio. It was the kind of oppressive stillness that always seemed to linger just before something terrible happened. Beneath a crescent moon, the town seemed asleep, every house cloaked in a false sense of security. But in the dreams of its residents, the real nightmare was about to begin. Freddy Krueger, once a sadistic killer of children, had been burned alive by the very parents of those he terrorized. His body was reduced to ash, but in death he had transcended his human form. Now, he was something far worse, a demon of nightmares, feeding on fear, tormenting the children of Springwood in their dreams, until reality blurred with the horrific landscapes of their minds. For Freddy, the past had always been personal. Katie Reynolds had no idea that tonight would be her last in this world of the waking. She was 17, with dark hair that fell just below her shoulders and a smart-ass attitude that shielded her from the world. She had heard the stories, of course, everyone in Springwood had, but she never believed them. The idea that a killer could stalk you in your dreams was ridiculous, nothing more than urban legend. But as she lay in bed, slipping into the embrace of sleep, Freddy was already watching. Her dream started simply enough. She was walking through the hallways of Springwood High, the lockers lined up like a regiment of soldiers, the lights above flickering sporadically. The sound of her shoes echoed through the empty halls. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, as if on cue, the school bell rang, the sound shrill and disorienting. Katie winced and pressed her hands to her ears. When she looked up, the lockers had changed. They were rusted, bent, and broken. Blood dripped from the metal edges, pooling on the floor in slow, thick streams. Her heart pounded. "Hello? Hello?" she called, her voice reverberating in the sudden silence. A soft scratching sound, like nails on a chalkboard, broke through the stillness. It was coming from behind her. Slowly, dread prickling her skin, Katie turned. A man stood at the end of the hall, his figure cast in shadow. A dirty brown fedora sat on his head, and he wore a striped red and green sweater, torn at the edges as if it had been through hell and back. His face, his face was a mask of charred flesh, burned and twisted into a permanent sneer. But it was his hand that caught her attention. Knives, long and sharp, glinted in the dim light, attached to an old glove that creaked with every flex of his fingers. "Kathy!" His voice slithered through the air, a rasping whisper laced with malice. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, breath quickening. "No, this isn't real," she muttered, trying to convince herself as she backed against the lockers. But the cold, slick blood on the metal told her otherwise. Freddy took a step forward, his boots clanking on the tiled floor. He dragged the blades of his glove along the lockers, the screeching sound digging into her mind like a drill. Sparks flew as metal met metal, lighting up his grotesque grin. "I'm real where it matters, sweetheart. Right here." He tapped his temple with one claw. "In your pretty little head." Katie bolted, sprinting down the hall as fast as her legs would carry her, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her. No matter how fast she ran, the exit stayed just out of reach. Freddy laughed, the sound echoing around her, bouncing off the walls. "You can run, but you can't wake up." With a sudden jolt, the floor dropped out from beneath her. Katie plummeted into darkness, her scream swallowed by the void. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her bones. Pain bloomed in her leg, sharp and intense. She was in the school's basement now, surrounded by rusted pipes and machinery that groaned and hissed. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Katie struggled to her feet, wincing from the pain in her ankle. "I love it when they try to run," Freddy's voice echoed from the shadows. She spun around, searching the darkness. Her heart pounded in her ears, sweat slicked her palms. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a flicker of movement, a flash of knives. Katie limped forward, desperate to escape, but her movements were sluggish, as if the air itself was fighting against her. Suddenly Freddy was there, inches away from her. His breath was hot against her skin, his burned face twisted in sadistic delight. She tried to scream, but he was faster. His gloved hand shot out, claws piercing her stomach with a sickening squelch. Katie gasped, eyes wide, as blood poured from the wounds. Freddy twisted the blades, his grin widening. "Welcome to my world, bitch," he hissed, yanking his claws free. Katie collapsed, the world around her going dark. But she didn't wake up. Elsewhere in the waking world, Katie's mother screamed as she found her daughter's lifeless body sprawled across the bed, her stomach torn open as though by invisible blades. The room reeked of blood and something else, something vile and unnatural. Freddy Krueger had claimed another victim. By the time Katie's death had been discovered, the fear had already begun to spread through Springwood. Parents whispered in hushed tones, recounting the old stories of Freddy Krueger. The adults remembered the nightmares, the horror that had once stalked them. Some had lost friends, siblings, even their own children, but no one dared speak of it aloud. Not anymore. But the teenagers didn't have that luxury. They were his new prey. Freddy's power was returning, stronger than ever. With each soul he claimed, his grip on Springwood tightened, his influence spreading through the dreamscape like a malignant disease. He was no longer confined to the dreams of a single child. Now he could invade the nightmares of anyone who dared sleep. Johnny, a high school football star, was next. Strong, confident, and unafraid of anything in the waking world. But like all the others, he was powerless against Freddy once the nightmares took hold. Johnny's dream began innocuously enough. He was on the football field, running drills with his team. But as he sprinted toward the end zone, the grass beneath his feet turned to ash. The stadium faded away, leaving him standing on the cracked and broken ground of a hellish wasteland. The sky was blood red, and the air reeked of sulphur. "Where the hell?" Johnny muttered, looking around in confusion. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of blades scraping together. Freddy's voice echoed through the air, mocking, taunting. "Nice try, Johnny boy, but there's no winning here." Johnny spun around, fists raised, ready to fight. "Come on, you son of a bitch, I'm not scared of you." Freddy emerged from the shadows, grinning that wicked, familiar grin. His fingers twitched, the claws on his glove gleaming in the sickly red light. Not yet, maybe. Without warning, the ground beneath Johnny split open, tendrils of molten lava snaking out, wrapping around his legs like chains. He struggled, trying to break free, but the more he fought, the tighter the tendrils gripped him, burning his skin. Freddy circled him, dragging his claws along the ground, the sound setting Johnny's teeth on edge. "See? I don't need you to be scared right away. I've got all night," Johnny screamed as the tendrils pulled him down, the heat scorching his flesh. Freddy watched, delighting in his agony. "That's it! Give me that fear!" Freddy slashed at Johnny's chest, the claws cutting deep, blood spraying across the ground. Meanwhile, in the real world, Johnny's body convulsed in his bed, his parents oblivious to the nightmare consuming their son. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late. Johnny's body lay limp, his chest torn open, a look of pure terror frozen on his face. Freddy was back. By the time the sun set again over Springwood, fear had taken root in the town like a weed. The news of Katie's and Johnny's death spread quickly, and the rumours followed close behind. There were whispers of nightmares, vivid, horrifying dreams that felt more real than anything should. Those who had lived through Freddy's first reign of terror recognised the signs, but most of the town's adults refused to accept the truth. They didn't want to remember. But Freddy didn't care if they believed in him or not. In fact, the denial only made his game more enjoyable. Madison, a shy girl who always stayed out of the limelight, had been trying to keep her head down as the fear escalated. But no one could escape Freddy once he had chosen them. She had been sleeping uneasily, tossing and turning under the weight of the growing dread. She dreamt of her room at first, a simple, innocent dream. But then she noticed something was off. Her bedroom window, which was always shut at night, was now wide open. A cold breeze blew the curtains inward, bringing with it the faint smell of burning. Her heart raced as she sat up, peering into the darkness beyond the window. Something moved, just out of sight. "Madison. Madison." A voice, soft and insidious, drifted through the night. She knew that voice. Freddy. With a gasp, she threw herself out of bed, scrambling toward the door. But when she yanked it open, she was no longer in her house. The floor dropped away beneath her feet, and she found herself standing in a long, narrow alley, the walls closing in on either side. Panic clawed at her throat as she turned, trying to find an escape. But the alley stretched on forever, and the shadows seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Freddy's laugh echoed around her, growing louder and louder until it filled her mind. "You can't run from me, little girl. I've been watching you, waiting for you." She sprinted down the alley, her bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The walls seemed to shift and move, warping and twisting in impossible ways. No matter how fast she ran, the shadows loomed closer, Freddy's presence thickening the air like a suffocating blanket. Ahead, she spotted an open door, a way out. Without thinking, she threw herself through it, crashing into a dimly lit room. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. But the room wasn't a sanctuary. It was a boiler room. Rusty pipes snaked across the ceiling, hissing steam at intervals. The walls were slick with grime, and the air was hot and suffocating, stinking of sweat and burnt metal. Madison's stomach churned as she realized where she was, Freddy's domain. The sound of knives scraping against metal echoed through the room. Madison turned, and there he was. Freddy stood just a few feet away, his twisted face lit by the dim glow of the boiler's flames. His fingers flexed, the claws on his glove clicking together menacingly. He whispered, grinning from ear to ear. Madison screamed and backed away, but Freddy was faster. He lunged at her, slashing at her arm with his claws. She felt the sharp, searing pain as the blades tore through her flesh, blood pouring from the wound. She stumbled backward, clutching her arm. Freddy's laughter echoed through the room. "I love that first cut. It's always the sweetest." Madison's vision blurred from the pain, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had to get away, had to find a way out of this nightmare. She bolted through the maze of pipes, her bare feet slipping on the slick floor. But no matter how far she ran, Freddy was always right behind her. In the real world, Madison's mother sat by her bedside, stroking her daughter's hair as she slept. She had noticed Madison tossing and turning in her sleep, her face contorted in pain. She whispered soothing words, unaware of the horror her daughter was experiencing. But as Madison thrashed in her bed, her mother saw something that made her heart stop. Long, bloody gashes appeared on Madison's arm, as if invisible claws were tearing into her flesh. The woman screamed, calling for help, but it was too late. Madison's body convulsed violently, her eyes rolling back in her head as the last breath left her body. Freddy had claimed another soul. Not everyone in Springwood was willing to sit idly by while Freddy Krueger hunted them in their dreams. Some had heard the stories from their older siblings or cousins, stories of the last group of teens who had fought back. They had called themselves the Dream Warriors, and though most of them had fallen in battle, their legend lived on in whispers. Mark, a sharp, determined teenager, had lost his older brother to Freddy years ago. He had spent years researching everything he could about Freddy Krueger, learning how he operated, what made him powerful, and, most importantly, how to fight him. He had gathered a small group of survivors, teens like himself who had seen the horrors in their dreams. There was Sarah, a girl whose parents had been part of the mob that killed Freddy. There was Jax, a tough-as-nails street kid who refused to let fear control him. And there was Haley, a quiet, introspective girl who possessed a unique ability, the power to control her dreams. They met in secret, in the basement of an abandoned house on Elm Street, planning their next move. "We need to confront him in the dream world," Mark said, pacing back and forth. "Freddy can't be beaten in the real world, but in our dreams, we can fight him on his turf." Jack scoffed. "Yeah, 'cause that worked out real great for the last guys." Mark shot him a look. "It's the only way. We have to band together, like the Dream Warriors did. If we face him alone, he'll pick us off one by one." Haley nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "I can pull you all into the same dream. It's risky, but if we work together, we might have a chance." The group agreed. They had no other choice. That night, they all met again. this time with a plan. They each took turns slipping into sleep, letting Haley guide them into the shared dream space. One by one, they found themselves in the same eerie version of Springwood, a twisted, nightmare reflection of their hometown, with darkened skies and crumbling buildings. "Stay close," Mark said, his voice steady despite the terror gnawing at his gut. "Freddy knows we're here." The sound of blades scraping against metal filled the air. "You don't say," Jax muttered, gripping a lead pipe he had pulled from a wrecked building. The ground beneath them rumbled, and Freddy appeared, rising from the cracks in the earth like a demon from hell. His laughter echoed through the empty streets as he stood before them, larger than life, his eyes glowing with malice. "You kids never learn, do you?" Freddy hissed, flexing his claws. "Always thinking you can beat me in my own game." "We're not like the others," Mark shouted, standing his ground. Freddy grinned, his burned skin stretching grotesquely. "Oh, I know. That's why this is going to be so much fun." He lunged at them, faster than any human could move. But this time the teens were ready. Sarah conjured a wall of fire, blocking Freddy's path. Jax swung his pipe at Freddy's head, but the dream demon ducked, his claws slashing out and catching Jax's leg. The boy screamed but stayed standing. Haley focused, bending the dream to her will. The ground beneath Freddy's feet gave way, turning into quicksand that began to swallow him whole. Freddy's grin never faltered. "Not bad, kids, but you'll have to do better than that." He snapped his fingers, and the nightmare world around them twisted, the sky turning blood red as the buildings around them collapsed. The ground shook violently, throwing the teens off balance. Freddy rose from the quicksand, his form warping and distorting as he grew larger, more monstrous. His claws elongated, dripping with blood as he towered over them. "This is my world," Freddy roared, his voice booming through the dream. "You think you can beat me? I am fear." But the dream warriors weren't backing down. Mark led the charge, his fists glowing with a power he didn't fully understand, but knew he could use against Freddy. Sarah controlled the flames, keeping Freddy at bay, while Haley continued to manipulate the dream, trying to weaken Freddy's hold on the nightmare. For the first time in years, Freddy felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: vulnerability. Freddy Krueger, towering like a nightmare colossus, let out a guttural laugh that seemed to shake the very fabric of the dream world. His form distorted and rippled, a grotesque reflection of his ultimate power within the dreamscape. The dream warriors below him felt the weight of his presence bearing down on them, a pressure that threatened to crush their resolve. But they stood firm. Haley, whose ability to manipulate the dream was their best weapon, concentrated harder than ever. She could feel Freddy's hold on the dream world, a dark and twisted vine, choking the life out of everything. But beneath that, she sensed something else. A weakness, a crack in the foundation of his power. "We can take him down," Haley said through gritted teeth, her voice strained but determined. "He's not invincible here." Freddy's twisted grin spread wide as he leaned down, towering over the group. "Oh, I'm not invincible." His voice was dripping with mockery. "Tell that to the dozens of dead kids I've carved up over the years. Tell that to your friends, the ones I've torn to pieces." With a flick of his wrist, Freddy's claws stretched impossibly long, slashing toward Jax. Jax barely dodged in time, the razor-sharp blade slicing through the air with a screech. His leg still throbbed from Freddy's earlier attack, but he ignored the pain, swinging with all his might. The pipe connected with Freddy's side, the clang of metal and flesh reverberating through the air. Freddy staggered, his grin faltering for a split second. The dream warriors were hitting him harder now, making him feel pain, real pain. Freddy snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. "You think a few tricks will stop me?" he spat. "I've been doing this for decades, you little brats. I'm the goddamn king of this place." He thrust his hand out, and the entire dream world shifted. The ground beneath the team's feet turned into a swirling abyss, the sky split open, and fire rained down from above. Everything around them twisted into a nightmarish landscape of burning trees, disfigured bodies and rivers of blood. Freddy grew larger, more monstrous, his burned flesh turning darker, his claws extending into wicked blades. He had become a demon of pure nightmare, his laughter echoing through the apocalyptic scene. The dream warriors were forced to scatter, each fighting to stay alive in this hellish environment. Mark led Sarah toward a pile of wreckage where they took cover from Freddy's attacks. Jax fought to stay on his feet, using his pipe to knock back anything Freddy threw at him, while Haley focused on keeping the dream together, searching for that crucial weakness. Freddy stalked through the flames like a predator, his voice booming as he taunted them. "You think you can survive me? I live in your worst fears. I am the face of every nightmare you've ever had. You think you've got a chance? Ha!" He lunged at Mark and Sarah, his claws slashing down toward them with lethal force. Mark shoved Sarah out of the way just in time, but Freddy's claws caught his shoulder, tearing through flesh and muscle. Mark screamed, falling to his knees as blood poured from the wound. Sarah, her face twisted in rage and fear, summoned all her strength, throwing a massive fireball at Freddy. It exploded against his chest, sending him staggering back. But Freddy's laughter only grew louder. "That all you got, sweetheart?" he taunted. "I like 'em feisty." But as Freddy advanced on Sarah, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Haley, standing a short distance away, had found the weak spot in the dream. She could feel it. Freddy's grip on this twisted reality was slipping, his power waning. "This is it," Haley whispered, her voice trembling with concentration. "I can break him, but I need more time." Jax, bloodied but still defiant, limped toward Freddy, drawing the dream demon's attention away from Haley. "Hey, ugly!" Jax shouted, brandishing pipe like a sword. "Why don't you pick on someone who can fight back?" Freddy turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw Jax standing before him. "Oh, I've been waiting for this, tough guy," Freddy sneered. "Let's see how long you last." With a roar, Freddy charged at Jax, his claws flashing in the fiery light. But Jax didn't back down. He swung the pipe with everything he had, smashing it against Freddy's face. The impact sent a shockwave through the dream world, and for the first time, Freddy screamed in pain. Haley seized the moment. With Freddy distracted, she focused all her energy on the weak point in the dream. She could feel the seams of the nightmare world unraveling, the edges of Freddy's control slipping away. But Freddy wasn't done yet. In a desperate move, he slashed at Jax's chest, his claws tearing through flesh and bone. Jax gasped, his body crumpling to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Freddy loomed over him, his grin twisted with sadistic pleasure. "Nice try, kid," Freddy hissed. "But you'll never..." A sudden burst of energy shot through the dream world, and Freddy's words were cut off. The ground trembled beneath him, and the fiery landscape began to collapse. Haley had done it. She had found the weakness and was ripping Freddy's nightmare world apart. Freddy staggered, his form flickering and distorting. His claws slashed at the air, trying to maintain his hold on the dream. But it was too late. The nightmare was crumbling around him. Mark, despite his injuries, stood up and walked toward Freddy. "It's over, Krueger," he said, his voice hoarse but full of defiance. "You've lost." Freddy's eyes burned with hatred as he glared at the teens. "You think this is over?" he snarled. "You think you've won? I'll be back. I always come back." With a final scream of fury, Freddy's body disintegrated, torn apart by the collapse of his own nightmare. The dream world shattered like glass, and the dream warriors found themselves falling into darkness. Mark woke with a start, gasping for air. He was back in the basement of the abandoned house, the others lying around him, unconscious but alive. His shoulder throbbed where Freddy had slashed him, but the pain was duller now, more like a memory than a fresh wound. Sarah and Haley stirred beside him, slowly waking from the shared dream. Jax, however, didn't move. "Jax!" Mark crawled over to his friend, shaking him gently, but there was no response. Jax's chest was covered in blood, his skin pale and cold. "He didn't make it," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Freddy got him." Mark felt a lump form in his throat. Jax had fought bravely, giving them the time they needed to defeat Freddy, but the price had been high. Hayley wiped away tears as she knelt beside Jax's body. "We stopped Freddy," she said softly. "But at what cost?" Mark clenched his fists, his heart heavy with guilt and grief. They had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Freddy had taken Jax, and the nightmares wouldn't end. Not really. They knew Freddy would return one day. He always did. But for now, they had bought themselves time. They had weakened him, forced him back into the shadows, if only for a while. As the first light of dawn crept through the dirty windows, the Dream Warriors stood together, united in their loss, but also in their resolve. Freddy Krueger might come back, but they wouldn't face him alone. And next time, they would be ready. Springwood was quiet in the days that followed the battle with Freddy. The few people who knew the truth about what had happened, Mark, Sarah, Hayley, kept their silence, unwilling to stir up the fear that had once gripped the town. They went back to their lives, haunted by the knowledge that the nightmare wasn't truly over. Freddy had retreated, but he was far from defeated. In the depths of the dream world, a figure stirred. Freddy Krueger, his body reforming from the ashes of his defeat, stood in the center of a dark, twisted landscape. His claws clicked together, a slow, menacing sound that echoed through the void. "Round two, kids," Freddy whispered to the darkness, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "You can't kill a nightmare." And somewhere, in the waking world, a child stirred in their sleep, their dreams beginning to twist into something far more terrifying. Freddy was coming for them. The nightmare never really ended. And with that, Freddy Krueger's reign of terror begins anew. The battle may be over, but the war continues in the dark corners of our minds where nightmares wait to strike.
Bloody Mary's Horror Stories. Watch, like,